Hi, welcome everyone. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. It's good to be back and getting back on with the program. While I was having lunch with George here, I was just thinking to myself that this is the third NGNL. So like we had the first one 2 years ago, which was fantastic and everyone loved it. And we could call that one NGNL version 1, yeah? And then last year we had a second one, which is even better. And I think everyone will agree that it was brilliant. And so we could call that one NGNL 2. And so now we're on our third NGNL, which I think we should call NGNL 4, keeping in good Angular standards by missing out 3 on everything.
You know, we should better drop the version and just call it NGNL.
It's just NGNL.
It's just NGNL.
OK, right, fair enough. Right, so welcome to our talk today. My name's Pete Bacon-Darwin. I'm the lead developer on the AngularJS team. And also working on things like ngUpgrade and a few other things inside Angular's core team.
And I am George Kalpakas. I am also a member of the AngularJS team and working on ngUpgrade.
So I think we can all agree that AngularJS is fantastic. Who loves AngularJS here? Yay, brilliant. And I think maybe George and I would go further and say we're slightly addicted to AngularJS because it has solved so many of our problems since 2009. It came along and it just fixed, it just made, opened up so many new opportunities for us to be able to build web apps more effectively.
So some of the things that we like about AngularJS are the declarative templates that we can see and know what is going on instead of having this spaghetti code. The two-way binding that
Data binding, yes.
people say that they don't like, but it was actually awesome at the time. And things like the stability and the dependency injection and like the third-party libraries that you can find for almost anything. And most of all, the community. That was awesome, and a large community and a very welcoming and inclusive community. And
yeah, so basically, when you get AngularJS, you don't just get the library, you get all of this other stuff as well, especially things like conferences like this. But AngularJS is now 8 years old, and it's starting to show its age. When it first came out, it was mainly aimed at like web developers who were knocking up small apps. But then it got so, people get engaged with it so much, they started building bigger and bigger things and having larger teams. And we just found it started to struggle to scale to some of these bigger scenarios. And then also this thing called mobile phones started to come along, and people wanted to build apps, maybe hybrid ones. And AngularJS can just about do that, but it's right on the edge of its limits.
so, but you know what? The new Angular framework solves many of these problems. So maybe it would seem like a good idea to upgrade our app to Angular.
So hold on a minute. So we're going Angular, AngularJS. I think everyone is understanding this terminology now, yeah? Hands up who doesn't know what Angular version 1 is called. Good. No? What? OK. So we've got AngularJS is everything with a 1 in front of the version, OK? Angular is everything else, all right? Now, this is going to make it very difficult for us giving this talk, because this talk is about changing from AngularJS to Angular, and we're going to be talking backwards and forwards between AngularJS components and services and Angular components and services. So we're bound to make mistakes. So just please bear with us. If either of us say the number 2, then you can all boo and hiss and pick us up on it. But hopefully we're gonna try really hard not to use the wrong branding. OK, so we talked about the fact that our AngularJS app might be struggling now to support some of these bigger and more amazing scenarios that Angular supports. So perhaps what we should do is just rewrite the code. Yeah, rewrite our app using Angular instead of AngularJS. Why would you not? Well, we did a survey. Jeff Wepley from Angular Air ran a survey recently, and we got some interesting results.
So yeah, first of all, most teams seem to have really big, large AngularJS applications, and there are small teams of few people that don't have the resources to dedicate to upgrade the whole thing or migrate the whole thing from AngularJS to Angular. And there are things that are not supported in Angular, some AngularJS APIs like $compile and stuff like that, that do not map directly to Angular concepts. And also, there are some use cases that are not really suitable for migration and stuff like that.
So one of the things that we mentioned earlier is the community and the sort of the people out there who are building stuff which you can use with Angular, and that's been going on for many years, and it's only really started going on with Angular in the last year or so. So there's a lot of catching up to do in terms of like third-party libraries as well. So you might be using a whole load of these things in your AngularJS app, which is not ready or available yet in Angular world.
So, but you know what? There is another way. ngUpgrade. So for anyone who hasn't guessed it yet, ngUpgrade is a library that helps you migrate your AngularJS apps to Angular piece by piece. So essentially, you can have AngularJS and Angular run side by side in the same hybrid application while you keep evolving the application and while the application still runs the way it used to.
This is the dream, guys, and we're going to make it happen. But we've done enough of the marketing talk now. We're going to get into some real coding, but it's always useful to have a use case when you're doing any kind of coding talk. So we chose a really original topic, which is a to-do app. This is basically the smallest app that we could come up with, which would actually allow us to demonstrate the API of ngUpgrade. What you can see here is this is a pure AngularJS app, and we've made it clear to you by putting little red boxes around all of the components and telling you which framework it currently uses. So you can see that everything's red. We're 100% AngularJS here. Let's have a look at what the actual file structure looks like, just so that you've got some context for when we're talking about the files. We've done a little bit of work on this app already. Okay, it's still AngularJS, but we're now building it with TypeScript. It's all written in TypeScript. And we've also structured the files so that they're in modules and and it's using components. So it's a modern AngularJS app, okay? So you might find that there's a few things in there which don't necessarily map directly onto what you're doing with your AngularJS app now, but you should see how it should work.
So to get a feeling of where we are heading, this is an intermediate state while we are moving our AngularJS app to a pure Angular app. This is a hybrid app. You can see that we have the red boxes that are things that belong to AngularJS interleaved with green boxes that are Angular stuff. And they are running in the same app. You can put AngularJS stuff inside Angular stuff and the other way around. And you can see that the root element, the big red box around, is owned by AngularJS. And inside it, we can have the app component that was migrated to Angular. And inside the app component, we can have AngularJS components. We have added a new Angular component, the footer component.
So this is amazing. We've got Angular and AngularJS coexisting in a single application with components inside each other. You know, you can have an AngularJS and an Angular and then an AngularJS and so on, all interleaved in this really complicated way, which hopefully will support your use cases. So let's have a look at the things that we're going to need to talk about in order to get to this stage. So here's our to-do list. This is our to-do list for our to-do app of stuff we're going to talk about today. So the first thing I guess we need to talk about is how do you bootstrap a hybrid AngularJS Angular app?
OK, so let's see. Obviously, because we're on two frameworks, we need to bootstrap both Angular and AngularJS in the same app. And So this is a bit of a dance. We need to bootstrap the Angular module first, and then we need to bootstrap the AngularJS module from within the Angular module. But because AngularJS gets to run its compile function, its compile service first, it owns the top-level element. And everything inside can be either Angular or AngularJS. So because we need to bootstrap because we need to bootstrap AngularJS before we bootstrap the Angular components, we don't have a bootstrap property on our module.
We're using this unknown hook that most people are not aware of called ngDoBootstrap, which you can use instead of providing bootstrap components. You can just use this hook instead.
Right. So let's see how we are doing bootstrapping in our original AngularJS app. Here,
can you see that? It's a bit lacking in contrast, isn't it? But we should be OK.
So we are manually bootstrapping our AngularJS app. We are not using ngApp. We are using the bootstrap method and passing in a root element and a root module. So in our hybrid app, we will have two root modules, one for Angular and one for AngularJS. So let's see how our Angular module.
So just to be clear, this is our standard AngularJS manual bootstrap. Yeah, there's no hybrid thing going on here yet. This is before we hybrid. Yeah. Often people would use ngApp, but we're manually bootstrapping, which is actually a better thing to do with all of your apps if you want to go home and get rid of your ngApp attribute.
OK, so here is the Angular module, the Angular root module. The difference from a regular Angular module is that we need the upgrade module, so we import it in the module and inject it into our constructor. And then we move the AngularJS bootstrap inside this ngDoBootstrap hook. And the only difference is that instead of calling Angular Bootstrap, we're calling this upgrade bootstrap helper method, which is a drop-in replacement for Angular Bootstrap.
So basically, instead of bootstrapping an app component like you would do in a normal Angular app, we're bootstrapping AngularJS at this point.
And then we bootstrap our Angular module normally, as we would with a regular Angular app.
Oh, I need to press a button, don't I? There we go.
OK. So this is standard Angular application bootstrapping.
And of course, once we bootstrap that module, that will then trigger the to-do bootstrap, which will then, not to-do bootstrap, ngDoBootstrap, which will then bootstrap AngularJS. So we've managed to bootstrap our app. Yeah, it seems a little bit complicated, but you only have to do it once, and then you completely forget about all of that code, and then you move on to working on your app. So, George, what we should do is start actually developing this hybrid app with some real Angular components. Yeah. So we've got this AngularJS app. Let's add an Angular component to it. How do we go about doing that?
So the good thing about having a hybrid app is that now we can add more stuff in Angular. So in order to do that, we need to understand how we downgrade a component. So downgrading means that we make something, an Angular thing, here a component, available to AngularJS, so that we can use it from inside AngularJS templates and other AngularJS components.
So just be clear, we're going to have another terminology issue here. We've already had Angular and AngularJS, which is confusing enough. We've now got downgrading and upgrading, and also we're going to use the term migrating as well, just to really throw the cat among the pigeons. So as George just said, downgrading means taking an Angular component and making it available to AngularJS. Okay. So this is what we're aiming for, right? We've got AngularJS app with all those nice red bits, and we're going to add in this new Angular component that's going to sit inside the app components template. All right, so the green box actually is living inside the AngularJS app component. So how do we actually create this, this downgraded component?
So as we would do with a normal Angular component, we import the component and we add it to the declarations list of our Angular root module. And we need to also add it to the entry components list. This is because for components that are used inside Angular templates, the Angular runtime creates a component, so we don't need to explicitly specify it. But we want to use this component inside AngularJS templates. And this means that it will be ngUpgrade that will create the component outside Angular. So we need to explicitly add it to the entry components list.
This is quite similar to if you created a dialog box, yeah, and you want the dialog box to just be popping up somewhere in your app, but it's not going to be brought in by a template. You have to add it as an entry component because it kind of exists on its own. And that's true of all of our downgrade components.
So now that we have registered our component with Angular, we need to make it available in AngularJS. So ngUpgrade provides this downgrade component helper that it's a function that returns a directive factory, and we can use that to register our component in AngularJS. So in order for AngularJS to know how to wire the bindings, we need to also specify the properties of the component, such as inputs and outputs. And
oh, I need to highlight those bits. So that's us using downgrade component, and this is the metadata that we're providing to help the downgrade component create the AngularJS facade that's going to live inside the AngularJS template.
So, and now we can use our footer component, which is an Angular component. We can use it inside AngularJS templates.
So this is what it might look like, yeah?
Right. So because this is an Angular component, we use the Angular binding syntax. You see these square brackets for inputs and round brackets for outputs. Some things to know, though, because this is inside an AngularJS template, it is owned by AngularJS. So the directives that we put on this component must be AngularJS directives. So we use ngRepeat instead of ng4, for example. And the expressions that get evaluated as bindings are also evaluated by AngularJS. So we use the $controller, or we use filters, not Angular pipes.
OK. So that's all there is to it. Yeah, we register our downgraded component using the downgrade component helper on an AngularJS module. And that makes it available to any of our AngularJS templates. And then we just used it inside the app component, which is still an AngularJS app component. Yeah? So what's next? We've downgraded a component, so how about we downgrade a service as well? We're going to add this logger component. This is just a generic component which we're going to access from both AngularJS and Angular services and components throughout the app. So it needs to be available to both frameworks. Okay, but we're going to build it in Angular, so it's going to be an Angular service.
OK, so let's see how we can downgrade the service.
This is what it will look like, OK?
So you can see the red arrows are things, components, or services in AngularJS that need to get access to the logger service. And the green arrow is an Angular thing that needs to get access to the logger service. So it will be an Angular service that we need to be able to access from both AngularJS and Angular.
What does the code look like?
So as we would do in a normal Angular app, we have to register the logger with the providers of our cert module. We create a new cert module that gets imported into the root module. And just like that now, OK. So by adding it to the providers list, it makes it available to any Angular bits of our application. So now let's see how to.
So this is just vanilla Angular, yeah? If you created a service in Angular, this is what you do. It's nothing clever there.
So in order to make it available to the AngularJS part of the app, we get a similar downgrade injectable helper that we can use, just passing in the logger service. And this ensures that both AngularJS and Angular get the same instance of the component.
you'll notice that in the Angular world, we'll use the class logger as the injection token. But AngularJS doesn't allow you to use non-string injector tokens. So we actually register it with a string in the AngularJS world. So if you're trying to get it in AngularJS, you would need to use the AngularJS way of accessing it. Both sides will get exactly the same instance. Yeah, the single instance of this service is shared between both injectors. So we've downgraded a component, we've downgraded a service. Before we get on to upgrading stuff, how about we just migrate our app component from AngularJS to Angular? So migrate does not mean upgrade, downgrade. It means we're actually going to take the code and convert it from an AngularJS component to an Angular component.
Right.
Voila. So this is what we're going to end up with. Yeah, the box around the to-do list has now turned green. Yeah, that's what the migration is going to do. So we're now going to end up with a green component, which is going to contain some other things. But what you'll notice is that the green app component now contains a template which has some AngularJS components in it. And we're not sure how to do that yet. And also, even worse, our to-do items service is an AngularJS service. And our Angular component needs to access this AngularJS service. So we're going to have another bit of work to do here. What do we need to do first?
OK, so obviously, we don't need to migrate all those components because we can just upgrade them. A quick reminder, upgrading means that we make an AngularJS thing available to Angular. So we can upgrade the components and the services that we need inside our Angular component, and then use those, although they will be AngularJS stuff, we can use them inside Angular. So let's see how we upgrade a component first. So
this is the component we're going to upgrade, right? We need to upgrade this item component, which is being used twice inside here, so that it's available to the Angular template of the app component.
So in order to make the component available in Angular, we basically register a directive. For anyone who didn't know, Angular has directives too. It's not just components. So we can register a directive that essentially represents our component in the Angular world. So as with a regular Angular directive, we specify a selector, and we can also specify inputs and outputs. We only have inputs here. So all the heavy lifting is done by the upgrade component class that we have to extend to create our facade. Upgrade component needs access to the element on which the directive appears and the Angular injector. So we are passing them the element and the Angular injector, and it wires up everything. It makes sure that the change detections are propagated correctly, that inputs and outputs are propagated between the frameworks. It will also take care of lifecycle hooks, detect them and wire them up correctly. So, yeah.
So you can't tell on the slide preview what the next little yellow box is going to be, so it's quite tricky. Can I just reiterate what George just said? When we're creating upgrade and downgrade components, not only are we just making them available in the template, we're doing some work behind the scenes to actually wire up the change detection and the digest cycles that are going on, so that when something inside the scope changes, then that gets passed through to the downgraded component and triggers its change detector. And similarly, in the upgrade case, if the Angular component has something that changes in its context and triggers change detection, it will get passed through to the upgraded component and trigger digest, so that everything will stay in sync. And it's quite a tricky little task that happens in the background. But that's all hidden away from you, so you don't have to worry about it. So we've upgraded the component, the item component, but we also had this to-do items service. So we also need to upgrade this guy too. So let's have a look at that.
OK, so let's see what it takes to upgrade a service.
So here's our service that we're going to upgrade, OK? And you can see that there's now a green arrow coming into it. So we need to make it available on the Angular injector.
Right. So the service is already available to AngularJS. So the AngularJS injector knows how to instantiate the service. So what we need to do is we need a factory function that will retrieve the service from the AngularJS injector, $injector, and it will return it. And then we can use this factory function to register a provider on our Angular module. In order for this to work in ahead-of-time compilation, we need to export the function. We need to export the factory function. We can't just inline it, but...
So George, did you just say for this to work with AOT?
Right.
So that's quite an interesting thing. All of this code works with ahead-of-time compilation, right? So all of the Angular code that we're describing here, you can run through the ahead-of-time compiler and generate that really fast, small code base with no runtime compiler in your production code, okay? So we've worked really hard to make sure that you can get the best possible outcome in terms of the code size and the speed of your ngUpgrade app. But it is a bit annoying that you then have to do things like exporting these functions rather than just inlining them.
A small price to pay, though. Yeah.
I feel so, yeah. You'll thank us in the long run. OK, so we've upgraded the component, the item component. We've upgraded the service. So let's have a look at actually migrating this Angular component across from AngularJS to Angular. I'm guessing it's pretty tricky, yeah?
Let's see.
As if the rest of the code slides were not hard enough. Have a look at that, boy.
So on the left-hand side, it is the code before migrating. So it's the AngularJS component. And on the right-hand side, it's the code after migrating it to Angular.
So this is a bit like those those magazines where it's like spot the difference competition. Can anyone spot the difference between these two bits of code? It might be a bit tricky, even if you're in the front row, right? So let's zoom in a little bit. It's not much better given the contrast, but hey.
OK, so let's see. First of all, in the declaration of the component, the difference is that we no longer need to wrap the class inside this component options object, and instead we use the component decorator, and we also specify the selector right there in the decorator, so alongside the component. In AngularJS, we had to specify the selector when we registered the component with the module. So in the template, OK, one difference that we didn't mention before, you can see here that this is a kebab case or dash case, how you want to call it. And this here is in kebab case. So because AngularJS templates are parsed by the browser, and the browser's HTML parser is case insensitive, we cannot use our properties the way they appear in the component. So in the component, we have this kebab case, but we have to convert it to, sorry, we have the camel case, but we have to convert it to kebab case to use it in the AngularJS template. So in Angular, we no longer need to do that. We can use the property exactly as it appears in our component. And
remember that this is actually our footer component, which we downgraded so it was available in AngularJS. When we move the whole app component across to Angular, it basically stays the same, yeah, except for this change of kebab case, because it was always available to Angular anyway. It's just that we made it available to AngularJS as well.
So we can also get rid of $controller when we refer to members of the component. And we also use the Angular syntax for bindings, so square brackets and round brackets. And finally, because this is an Angular template, we use Angular directives. So we replaced ngRepeat with ng4. And that's about it.
And everyone's now happy, because this can now be parsed by your IDE, and it can tell you what's wrong with it. It's fantastic.
And finally, in the component itself, we have gotten rid of the $inject property that we no longer need for DI. We have renamed the lifecycle hooks. So replace $on_init with ng_on_init.
I'm sad about that. I really like all our dollar prefix stuff in AngularJS. It makes me very sad that we've replaced it with the letters ng. Anyway, never mind. We'll move on.
OK. And we can, this is not necessary, but we can implement the interface that will give us better intelligence and compile time checks regarding the lifecycle hooks.
But really, not much changes. If you've written your AngularJS component using the 1.5 and above AngularJS styles that we're suggesting, with components and using lifecycle hooks, one-way bindings, whatever, then really the transition across is pretty straightforward. Yeah. Obviously, I'm not going to lie to you and say that all of your components are going to be that easy. But you can see that there's definitely a route here that you can follow. OK? So let's go over what we've done.
OK.
So we started by talking about the fact that we're going to have two frameworks living side by side. And in order to do that, we need to bootstrap them both. If you remember, we bootstrap the Angular module, which then triggers the AngularJS module to be bootstrapped after the fact, OK? As part of the bootstrapping. But AngularJS gets to own the root element of your HTML page.
So then we have seen how we can downgrade components and services. So this means how we can continue to evolve our application and add new features in Angular, and how we can make them available in the already existing AngularJS part of the app.
We've downgraded service, which you just said. Yeah. And we've upgraded stuff as well. So we've made things available from AngularJS back into Angular, so you don't have to take an entire subsection of your app and migrate the entire thing in one go. Also, it gives you the opportunity, like, for instance, if you had a library of components that you're using that maybe you spend a lot of time building and you're sharing between multiple projects, you can continue to use those in your new Angular apps, but just upgrade them so that they're available to your Angular apps if you're going to turn them into hybrids. So we've got a few bonus extras that we didn't think we'd have time to show you, or maybe it would just melt your brains if we tried to show you too many API things. The first one is pretty much in now. I think we just merged it in the last few days. You can do multi-slot transclusion, so you can have multiple parts of your of the children of your component transcluded into your Angular component. When you're using it in Angular, it's called projection, but when you're using it in AngularJS, it's called transclusion.
So the cool part is that you can transclude or project parts that are controlled by AngularJS inside an Angular component and the other way around. So it works pretty well. The other thing that we haven't shown is that ngUpgrade component that does the heavy lifting behind the scenes. It can wire up the control value accessor interface if your component implements it. This is something similar to the ng model with the AngularJS ng model. So if you have a component that implements the control value accessor interface and you downgrade that component and you attach ng model on it, it will work. It will wire up and update the DOM and get the two-way binding working.
Sorry, just a quick question. Who knows what control value accessor is in Angular? Hands up. Yeah. So basically, just to be clear, you can create your own custom inputs. So like this morning, Todd was building various inputs using his reactive forms module. But what you can actually do is create components that expose their data, so you can bind to them with like this sort of banana in a box style binding. And that effectively is your ng model, which you get in AngularJS. So we've allowed you to actually downgrade an Angular component and then stick an ng model inside your AngularJS template onto that component and use it as though it was just like an input box or something, yeah?
A shout out to Carl Simon that implemented this interoperability. And this is also something that is used by some ng material and the input to be able to interoperate with ng model in a hybrid app.
And finally, we've got protractor support. That doesn't sound very exciting, but being able to end-to-end test your ngUpgrade modules applications is really important. And there's a thing inside protractor which is a clever little feature which allows it to wait until your Angular or your AngularJS app has settled, so that all of the async operations that load up the templates or download some data or whatever have finished before it moves on to the next end-to-end step. Now, of course, when you've got a hybrid app, you've got two frameworks that can both be doing async stuff. So we've put in some protractor support. Well, it was mostly written by some of the protractor team. So it kind of joins the two bits together. So it'll wait for both frameworks to finish before it moves to the next protractor step. So your end-to-end tests can just pretend that they don't know that it's an upgrade app and just assume that it's an Angular or an AngularJS app. Again, it seems very simple, but if you looked at the code, it'll like just make you squirm and feel slightly giddy. So some things for the future. Yeah, we're not done with ngUpgrade yet. There's still quite a lot of things that we'd like to do to make it even better.
So some of the things that we are thinking about working on in the future, some of them are already in the works. One is being able to lazy load Angular or AngularJS if, for example, you have a specific part of your application that uses Angular or AngularJS. If you have a specific route that uses Angular or AngularJS, you will be able to lazy load that part and lazy load the framework that it needs, and you don't have to load the framework from the beginning.
So right now, if you want to unit test an ngUpgrade app, it's a little bit tricky. Because of this little dance that we have to do at the bootstrap to join the two injectors together so that they know about each other, the easiest way to unit test your code, which has got upgrade and downgrade components, is to basically bootstrap a little micro hybrid app for every single unit test. And obviously, if you've got hundreds and thousands of unit tests, which I'm sure all of you have because you're all very diligent test-driven developers, then that could be a bit of a pain. It's going to slow down your testing run. So we're going to be working on trying to make that a little bit easier, maybe short circuit the actual bootstrapping mechanism so we can create sort of a little mini test bed effectively, which contains both the hybrid injectors. So that's another step on the roadmap.
So another thing that is not very easy right now is when you have routers or routers for inside both frameworks, then it's difficult to which router or which router owns the URL and how they interact with each other. So we need to, and there is a UI router, there is ngRoute, and there is the Angular router. So we need a better story around routing and how the two can work together more harmoniously.
And you'll also notice that when you're setting up the downgrade component, we had to specify the inputs and outputs. And if you're doing projection, you also had to specify the selectors as well, which are the multi-slot selectors for finding which bits you're going to map to where inside the template. Tobias Bosch, who's the genius behind much of the AOT compiler and other parts of the compiler, just has put together a pull request which changes both the JIT compiler and the AOT compiler to provide that information to us at runtime. So we're hoping that we should be able to remove some of the boilerplate from that API. That doesn't mean that what we've shown you is wrong, because it will still work, but it means that you will actually be able to remove the bits where we were specifying the inputs and outputs. So it'll be a lot even cleaner code, less effort. Also, we're considering writing a little bit of tooling, which will allow us to, at design time, at compile time, to introspect the AngularJS components, find out what the inputs and outputs are, and generate some of those at directive decorators for us. It's not going to be sort of done in the background. You'd probably run it as a tool that would just generate some code that you can insert into your app. But hopefully this will just smooth the way and stop you having to write so much code.
And the documentation is something that we want to work on and have better examples and better workflows to guide you through the migration process.
I mentioned earlier that Jeff Welpley put together a survey, which maybe some of you filled in. One of the biggest requests from the survey was that they felt that there wasn't enough information out there about an ngUpgrade. So we're going to address that. Jeff's also working on a community project where they're going to try and capture lots of upgrade ideas and cookbook recipes so that we can share the best ideas for migrating from AngularJS to Angular. Just stop myself in time. So yeah, just keep an eye out for that. Hopefully this talk will give you a starting point, and you're going to be finding more and more information going forward. So this is our message for you to take home, go back and play with ngUpgrade. You don't have to big bang. If you want, you can go step by step. Thank you very much.
Thank you.